Okay, good.
All right. So, welcome everybody. This is going to be a Converging Perspectives conversation on intuition. Intuition is a word that people use maybe perhaps haphazardly without defining it that well. We have some people who view intuition as a truth-telling device. Some view it as sort of a pattern recognition tool. Some people just view it as anything that's subconscious. It's a subconscious thinking process that we're not even aware of. But there are Carl Jung sort of described intuition in a deeper sense because he was experiencing with some of his psychological patients phenomenon that many would say is hard to explain. Things where people were having kind of like psychic moments and other sort of recognitions of stories they had no prior knowledge to. And so there is this other sort of mystical realm that intuition is always is often uh, related to. And so I thought today we would bring together Valencia Selestina, an artist who has some strong ideas about intuition and her experience with intuition, and Fabio Magrini, an MD and a scientist who has his ideas of intuition. I thought we might discuss this and mold this idea and see if we can come to a convergence on defining what intuition really is and how to use it properly in this world. And
Mhm.
I invite anyone who's watching to question us, write up some questions, ask us questions, interject something, and so here we go. Welcome, Valencia.
Uh, Thank you. My third time here and first time with Fabio. Thanks for having me.
And Fabio, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Valencia. First time, but maybe not last.
So, so intuition, is it a, let's just start with this idea. Is it a pattern recognition tool, which is what a lot of cognitive psychologists suggest, that it might be, this is something that some people say it's a right brain activity. It's sort of, it's getting at sort of a pattern. What do you think about that theory of intuition?
Who wants
Should
to
I start
start?
or do you
Yeah,
want to
go
start,
ahead.
Fabio?
Valencia, you go ahead. You go ahead.
You go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm not a neurologist, but to me, it feels like it's not even coming from the brain when I experience it. It, although if you think that the brain is responsible for everything that we think and feel and sense, then you can say that, yeah, maybe it comes from the brain, but I guess I associate the brain more with the mind, with the thinking. And to me, the intuition comes outside of thinking. So in that sense, I perceive it as coming from, not from the brain, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. So you're saying you're identifying the brain with conscious cognition of real
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
thinking, and so anything that's not conscious cognition, um, that maybe is more subconscious or extra conscious, would be the intuition.
I perceive it that way, and I perceive intuition as something that sort of just comes. Um, that doesn't, I can't control it. I can only choose to listen to it or not. That's
Right.
all I can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Fabio, what do you think?
Um, I think I have surprisingly enough, I have a slightly different perspective in the sense that I think that we are biological beings, but that doesn't mean that we are biological only. Um, so I see the brain almost as a translating device, right? It's something that allows us to ideate concepts that might not be completely biological. So, and when we talk about the brain, I intend to talk about more about what is the nervous system, which is kind of a more complex and expanded network that encompasses the brain, but many other organs. So, so to me, intuition is, I agree with Valencia that it is something that it's unexpected and rather irrational. But to me, it's something that is also tricky in the sense that because, again, we have a brain which is a translator, a translator can make mistakes. It can tell you that some message comes from I don't know, some message comes from France, but in reality it's coming from Italy or from the UK, right? So, and it's translated in the same language. So I think that, at least in my experience, intuition has a particular flavor that it's different from instinct or from unconscious thought. And that flavor is really a detachment from outcome. It's not, for instance, intuition to me is never critical. It's never negative. It's always like about possibilities. It's not, when I get like alarm bells, it's more like instinct than intuition. So it's more biological than actually consciousness related.
This relates to my reading on neuroscience, in that they often associate like judgment with the midbrain. The emotional brain is often associated with activity when there's judgment, and so that the theory that the right cerebral cortex is more activated or active during intuitive processes would suggest, this is a totally different process. Wherever it's coming from, it's lighting up a very different part of the brain, and that instinctual judgment that I think when you're saying, a negative thought, all the cognitive biases seem to be, not just all cognitive biases, but many cognitive biases are linked to the midbrain, and this idea of sort of stopping thought, just collapsing the discussion of the internal discussion of reality into a judgment, and often it's a negative judgment because we're defensive creatures. We're trying to protect ourselves, and so I often feel like when someone says, "Oh, I had a gut instinct, a gut decision," or that's because there's the vagus nerve going down to the gut, and there's a ton of neurons that fire in the gut that connect directly to the brain. So there's a theory that that's what people are actually feeling when they're saying they made a gut decision. And some people will say that they made like a heart decision. Well, there's a ton of neuron activity right at the heart too. That's like, some people call it the second brain. And so in a way, this all would make sense from a neuroscience perspective as well, that there are different centers of access for different kind of decision making or feelings or conscious or subconscious processes, I should say, and yet we are able to somewhat be aware of how they feel, and they're different.
Yeah, I think what Fabio, how he distinguished between instinct and intuition, I think that's the same conclusion that I came across when I talked to some people that I had a debate about intuition. And we kept using the same word intuition until I asked him to describe how does intuition feel like to you? Because he was talking about intuition in a way that I just couldn't grasp and couldn't understand, because that's not how I experienced it. And when he described it, I was like, I wouldn't call that intuition. I would call that instinct. Because he comes from a much more scientific background. So he was asking me, how can I program intuition? How can I program it so that I can use it to predict future instances of what happens so that it's more accurate? And I'm like, that's not how intuition works, at least not how I understand it. Like, you can't program intuition. Like, it was just so mind-boggling that he was asking me how we can program intuition. And I was like, what? Yeah. So, I guess that's the first moment that I really started to understand that we understand it differently, this
Yeah.
word.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you. I think that when we talk about intuition and we start talking about defining it or, kind of making it a tool, it becomes very tricky because immediately the left brain kicks in, right? And that's what kind of spoils everything all the time.
Fabio, why don't you define the left brain a little bit for us, for people who don't know what the characteristics of the left brain theory.
Right. Well, there are many theories about the left and right brain. So there, we know that the left brain is more rational, is more experience-based, is where we accumulate experiences, and we learn from repetition. So the left brain is very much geared towards predictability, safety, repetition, resistance to change, and clear cut yes no decisions.
And it's language, it's the language center too, right? It's language, and
right,
therefore concepts and categories are really happening.
Right. Categories, judgment, definitions, hierarchies, those come almost exclusively from the from the left brain.
Right.
The right brain is more of a research center. It's what
expansion.
Right. It's what allows us to learn new concepts. It's what allows us to envisage different possibility and probabilities. It's also what allows us to innovate. Innovation from the left brain is almost impossible. So, again, in tradition is where where intuition comes from. And can you hear my cat?
I can hear your cat.
Yes, everybody can.
It looks like she wants to join in the fun.
It's just I've been very busy today, and I haven't given them any attention, and I'm being told off. Yeah. Yeah. Well. So anyway, I think that's what the right and the left brain. Then there are a number of evolutionary theories and neurological theories. So the exchange from the left and the right brain happens into this body in the brain that is called corpus callosum, and that's where the intersection of communication from the right and the left brain kind of integrate. So that's the integrative tool. However, there's been a number of studies showing that the corpus callosum is actually deactivated in certain personality types. And when you actually have brain resections, where you actually eliminate half of the brain or part of the one of the lobes of the brain, the other side tend to kind of compensate. So there is a theory from this British neurologist called Ian Goldcrest, who from Oxford, who believes that in our Western culture, we actually almost exclusively rely on the left brain, and even for those processes that are traditionally belong to the left, on the left brain, even for those processes that belong traditionally to the right brain.
Right, which would suggest that this friend of Valencia's is basically saying, how does my left brain control my right brain?
Right, exactly. That's, right? How can I make my left brain work like a right brain?
And that's completely impossible. It would defeat the whole purpose, because you can't grip something that's supposed to be sort of, I don't know, like how we're gonna describe it, how it comes to us.
Well, it's consciousness, right? So one is logical thought, and rationality, and the other piece is consciousness in its broadest term. So it's not just the ability to compute notions. Hold on, let me close the door for a second.
So Valencia, while he's closing the door, why don't you talk about how you experience intuition a little bit as an artist?
Well, I guess for me, I link it a lot to what some people call the flow state. For me, the flow state tends to happen when I'm just in single-minded focus doing something. Some people access it with meditation. That doesn't really work for me because I'm too... I tend to be in a better meditative state when I'm maybe dancing or making art. I like something active rather than just sitting still and listening to the inner voice or something like that. Like I fall asleep within a few minutes if I try to meditate. I'm horrible at it. So so for me, intuition though doesn't only come when I'm doing these activities. It just comes triggered by something, and it's usually sometimes it pertains to my personal life with regards to specific people in my life. It will tell me something and I'm like, nah, no way, I don't want to believe that, and then it turns out to be true anyway. So it's sort of like you have a denial of it at first, and then slowly you're like, I don't want to believe it, but I also can't deny that it feels true. And then eventually you surrender, like, yeah, okay, I knew it all along. Like that intuition has told me all along. So that's how I experience it with regards to my personal life. I had a period last year, at the end of last year, where I had a heightened, I was going through a lot of deep personal stuff, like going through maybe deep shadow work, some people call it. And it also birthed a huge amount of creativity out of it. And also an intuitive period where I felt kind of like, so just to give an example, I was doing a dance performance in November in Berlin. And for some strange reason, I felt like I was dancing out my own life story, including the parts that I have not lived yet. And a part of this story was pretty sad, pretty tragic. And it included the loss of a loved one, which a lot of us, I guess, is a pretty universal experience. We all experience it at some point, unless you die at age 2, maybe, And so there was some kind of a strange knowing that will happen to me. And there is a resistance and a surrender all at once. And I suddenly had this moment of grieving for my future self that was happening I don't know if that makes sense, but I felt like it felt like the time sort of
collapsed,
compressed. Yeah. And I felt like I was grieving for something that hasn't happened, but I know will happen. And I felt like that information only came to me because I was in a state where I could face that information and receive it without running away from it, knowing kind of like, okay, yeah, that's going to happen, but I'm going to head towards that anyway. Whereas maybe if I received it earlier, I'll just be like, I don't want to go there. So I'm just going to like not get into any kind of relationship that will make me be in that position of emotional vulnerability. And so I don't experience that pain, if that makes sense. So there is a sense that that information came to me only when I was ready for it.
So can I ask you a question? How was that intuition? It's an honest question, because I find that, at least for me, intuition is always very practical in a way. So intuition comes about things that are very permanent into my job or into my life, into my everyday things, right? So, shall I turn left or right now, right? Or let me go down there and I'm gonna kind of park. I need to find the parking space. It's as kind of literally as trivial as that in a daily basis. So when it comes to the kind of sensations that you describe, I recognize them. I'm familiar with that kind of sense of almost prophetic sense, right? A sense of prophecy, a sense of foresight. See, that to me is not so much intuition, because then, to me, intuition is essentially, again, from an evolutionary perspective, it's really an animal thing, right? It's something that every creature has, and that is very specific to prey more than to kind of natural prey and natural predator. Intuition is very much a characteristic of the prey, where they know instinctively how to turn, how to move to escape the predator, or to kind of avoid, or to, as a survival instinct.
So that's because that sounds kind of like pattern recognition, right? Like this is
it's like an instinct, no?
Pattern recognition?
Well, not really, because again, there is a component of instinct, but it's mostly, when there is like a chase, like, in nature, there is pattern, but there's also unpredictability, right? Because you don't know whether you got one lion coming after you, 3 lions, or you are in a new kind of terrain. So it's that ability to adapt very quickly in almost a quantum fashion to unpredictable situations. So to me, instinct is something that relies on experience. To me, intuition is something that is detached from experience. So
yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
in my experience, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at least for me, and that's why I'm asking the question, when I have that kind of feeling of, I call it impending doom, or, that kind of, that kind of prophetic foresight that comes to everybody, right? That grieving for something that hasn't happened yet, as you described it. I always ask myself whether that is truly intuition, or is something that is guided by fear, which is guided by my unconscious or conscious or ancestral traumatic experience, right, around a certain event. So that is where, and to me, that Valencia is where it gets really tricky. That when we have this kind of intuitions, as I was saying before, we hear the translation, but we don't have absolute clarity of the place where that translation is coming from, right? And that's why, does it make sense?
So the kind of intuition you're describing, where it applies more for trivial things, I do experience them as well, sometimes with very random things. Like the other day, I just happened to watch a video that popped up on my YouTube feed, because it was there, by a channel that I didn't even follow. So, but the title was interesting, so I checked it out. And then 2 hours later, I had a call with a friend who was describing an experience that is so similar to what I just watched, that it was like, whoa, this is so crazy, and I don't know what guided me to that video. I don't know if there is any causal relation, but there is a sort of similarity. But with regards to what you said about this prophetic thing, even though what I described sounded tragic, I didn't really perceive it as an impending doom.
Right. Yeah, I just kind of.
I feel like, and when I said that, I felt like I received this information at the time when I was sort of ready for it. It's because I was able to react to it not from a place of fear, but from a place of acceptance. And also from an understanding that death is not actually separation. From this understanding that even though it is a loss in the physical world, it is not actually loss. And I felt like having that grief now, or last year, is actually preparing me for that actual moment. So I'm not broken when that eventually happens. So I treat it actually as something positive. It felt like it's preparing me for the next step. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's beautiful. It sounds as if too, Valencia, it's like there's some sense bringing the snapping of time to a singularity in a sense, and then that is allowing this incredible sort of psychological healing to take place that otherwise wasn't necessarily available, right? But I don't know if you define the psychological healing as part of intuition or just the result of, in this case, the intuitive leap around time allowed you to get there, to get into that place where you could accept what was going on, have the instant grieving or shedding or whatever that process was, and have the integration.
Right. Well, I wonder whether we are talking about a number of different concepts here, right? Because we also influenced by some New Age teachings that, in my opinion, tend up to kind of mix up a lot of those concepts together. So what I'm hearing that we're talking about is almost like what in New Age spirituality is described as opening a channel, right? And that is connected to a level of at least what is described again as a spiritual healing. So you can open your channel once you're actually healed, and therefore you can allow this wisdom to come through.
Yeah.
Or Fabio, also when I hear opening the channel, I also think about releasing inner tension. There may be some inner block happening where there's two conflicting ideas or two beliefs that do not work together. And
yeah, that's
like
the
opening the
piece,
channel
right?
is the same thing, right? It's like opening the channel is allowing for these things to resolve.
Yeah, it's you can't open the channel unless you resolve this friction, right?
Oh, gotcha.
So you resolve this friction, and therefore then your channel's open. But
sorry, you go first.
Yeah, but I think that it's a slippery slope in a sense, because this kind of philosophy and this kind of mentality comes with a lot of hang-ups. So it comes with a understanding of what healing is, a certain hierarchy of healing, a definition of who's healed and who's not, and a certain presumption that from a personal perspective, what we're hearing is the correct voice, right? So there are kind of a number of levels that, to me, interfere with again, it seems to me like a left brain process taking over what is a completely detached process, right?
Because the hierarchy would suggest it's a left brain systematizing of things.
Yeah, I mean, if you start, from the perspective that I'm healed and you're not, and you don't understand what I'm talking about because you are in the dark where I have possess of the light, that's a judgment, and it's already disjointed from an intuitive process.
Absolutely, right.
So that does it make sense? So I think that. And to me, there is a difference, and then we can discuss whether we believe in these things or not, but that's a separate discussion. But there is also a difference between intuition, psychic powers, like foresight or synchronicities and kind of, magical thinking, not intended in a negative way, and true intuition. And that's why I was saying that for me, intuition is practical. It doesn't mean trivial, but it means very practical. It means that, so for me, intuition was I needed to do work on the house, and I thought I needed to do it there. And then I realized that, there was like this resistance, not yet, not yet, not yet. And I followed that intuition, and that kind of brought me to a place where I delayed everything, but all of a sudden everything came together in the most perfect way that could have been. Whereas if I started too early, it wouldn't be as right? So it's like literally the little voice that you have in your head that says, turn right or turn left. But it can be much less trivial than that, right?
Like a divining
Yeah.
rod, of course, there's sort of an arrow that points you in the right direction. Is that what you're saying, Fabio?
It's like it's essentially to me not different from a biological perspective to the quantum organelles that we can see in birds, in migratory species, which tell them when is the time to move or to migrate and where to migrate to. Or for birds in flocks, that allows the birds to all move at exactly the same time without delay.
That's a beautiful concept. Okay, Valencia, what do you think?
I think I agree in the sense of intuition being practical, in the sense that the information I relate to you was practical for me. And usually how I recognize that this intuitive information is important for me is if I feel a resistance to it. And this I find one of the more fascinating recognitions I have, that yes, I have small little seemingly not so consequential little decisions, like what YouTube video do I watch today, like I described earlier. But there are also instances where I feel a resistance to the knowledge that came to me. And this is because I perceive it, at least, as a sort of challenge, and it not say attacks, but it exposes a part of me that I need to address. That because I'm resisting to it, you know.
Right.
And so if I'm resisting to it, then I ask myself, why am I resisting to it? Am I being too proud? Am I being, what am I afraid of that I'm resisting to it? And so the information that I described earlier came with like a resistance, but also a lot of catharsis, because I allowed myself to just grieve. And I don't know, like after you spoke a little bit, it made me think, if you believe in this idea of whether it's the Akashic records of or reincarnation, was I grieving for something that actually happened in another life in the past that is still with me today, and I release that instead of a future life. So there is also the idea that maybe that information I did not interpret it exactly correct, and maybe later it becomes clearer that actually the interpretation that you had was not fully accurate. It was close enough, but it was not really accurate. So sometimes that happens as well, because like you said, the brain is the translator, and sometimes maybe we don't interpret it exactly the right way, but maybe that is also intentional. I kind of feel like we have everything that we need, and everything that we know is what we exactly need to know to do what we need to do right now. And so at a certain time, I know this much, and therefore it makes me create certain conclusions. And when I have learned more, then I have a more complete picture, and then I understand it better. One of the things that happened to me recently that also came with a lot of resistance happened shortly before just when the lockdown hit, actually. I had a very intense moment of recognizing, and this is really just at the start when I started posting some controversial stuff on social media and was getting a lot of backlash from it. And I was kind of on the way from LA to San Francisco when San Francisco was just given the stay-at-home orders at that time. And my friend and I decided to go there one day earlier so that we can get there safely. And then I had this, that day, I just had a really, like the person that was interacting with me was being very, very violent, very angry, very, very angry. And I was kind of, and because of something I posted. And so he went from commenting to writing to me directly on Messenger. And then I was feeling a lot of energy, and I just kind of responded as kindly as possible. I was literally thanking him for expressing himself, and he was getting even more mad that I was thanking him for being mad at me. He didn't understand what am I thinking. Like, he was thinking I must be tricking him, I must be lying to him, and things like that. So I did that for a bit, and after a while he softened down, and I felt, even though he didn't say it outright, I felt like there was a healing that just took place because I triggered him, and then he reacted to me, and I allowed him to react without reacting back.
Did that change your mind at all? Did that discussion change your mind at all?
It didn't change either of our minds.
Right. So why do you think there was a? So again, don't you think I'm being very, very honest and very, very straightforward here. Why do you think that? Don't you think that the idea that there was a healing going on is actually a little bit of a presumption?
Yeah.
Because if neither have actually kind of moved that position in any shape or form, then where is the healing?
But you don't heal by changing your mind. The healing, for me, it's just the way he spoke towards the end changed a lot, since I said that, because he was confused that I was not defending myself. Right. I was just, thank you. You're right. Yeah, cool.
This is great.
That.
So Valencia, could this be another interpretation of this be that essentially the animal sort of aggression in you dropped, and his animal aggression also then inherently dropped? Like the fact that you were not having a fight anymore, there was no resistance to push against. His defense mechanisms also shut off.
In a way, yeah, but I was never aggressive to him in the first place. He was aggressive towards me because my post offended him a lot, and he was very angry, and I was never really angry even from the beginning. But after a while, I told him that if he had this conversation with me 6 months ago, I would have been a lot more defensive. The only reason why I was not defensive now is because a few months before, I used to really hate misunderstandings with a passion. I was like, if people can just speak honestly, there will be no misunderstandings. Everyone will be so happy. And then I had this kind of an epiphany moment in late last year where, well, I can't control how other people understand me. So why do I try so hard to control how they perceive me? So that moment kind of gave me a bit more of a relief that, like, even if they misunderstand me, that's okay. And so I was okay with him misunderstanding me and making all sorts of character attacks, calling me names and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, sure, maybe.
Was this an intuitive, where's the intuition come into this? Did you feel an intuitive?
So this is the backstory to what I was gonna say. Okay, so this is not the intuitive part.
Sorry.
But he essentially, after I told him about that, how I, because this conversation took place then, I was able to respond to him this way. He started to actually be nice. He was like, oh, when I get angry, I sound very ugly, and he might have apologized in a sort of roundabout way, but that conversation ended on a very positive note. And it started on a really, really bad note. And it came to me that I really didn't like triggering people that way. But if that didn't happen, this opportunity to heal wouldn't have happened. Because I kind of got the sense that I was just on the receiving end of a lot of things that happened in other parts of his life. And I was simply just not taking that on and bringing it to other people. I was just like, okay, yeah, bring it out. I'm just gonna be like a like a shield, just like let it diffuse and let it be expressed. And I think that is a form of healing. It's like a catharsis.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we talk about healing in a different way. I think that we always bring ourselves and our history into anything that we do, right? So we perceive the world from our own experience. That's the fallacy of the left brain that allows us only to interpret events according to our own experience.
Yes.
So to me, that realization is a form of healing, but it's not an intuition, if that makes sense.
Oh no, but that's not. But that's not the intuition
Let's
that
get
I
to
was
the
describing.
Why don't you get to the intuition, Valencia, so we stop misinterpreting.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's I couldn't tell the next part without telling this part first.
Okay.
So because they tie in together, but essentially that experience, coupled with a few other things that happened just before that, kind of I had this moment of like, oh my God, now everything in my life made sense. Why I had that experience as a child, why I had that experience as a teenager, blah, 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 where I kind of felt this sense of knowing that a big part of my reason for being alive is to be something that revolts against a system, if that makes sense. And that comes with a lot of rejection, and that comes with a lot of discomfort. And I was resisting towards this information like crazy. I was like, I don't want to do this. Like this is too uncomfortable. I don't want to walk down that road. And
so you had an intuitive cognition of essentially your archetype in this life.
In a way, yeah, in a way. This ties into
as a resistance to the institution or the system that
whatever that system is. You know, I've always been irreverent towards authority figures growing up, even towards my own dad. If something being told to me doesn't make sense, I just say it doesn't make sense. Like nobody can really like tell me what to do. So and that created issues growing up. But I realized that those were all preparations for the next thing. And now I'm at this stage, and I was facing a lot of attacks from, you know, people in my life.
Right.
And
it
was uncomfortable.
So this cognition felt like an intuition to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems to me this is beautiful. It matches the pattern recognition theory to me, because it seems like you've got a lot of evidence that you're now conscious of that relates to that. It was sort of like your mind just pulled all this stuff from the subconscious up right at the right moment. It's like, hey, look, it all fits. I'm an anti-establishment
like the puzzle
archetype. That's who I am.
Yeah, it seems
and
to
I'm
me
like
a rebel.
I don't want to be this.
Right.
I don't want to do this.
So all your fear, right. It brings up all the evidence, but this is who I am, and all the resistance. No, I don't want to do that. And it's like, but guess what?
Like,
this is who I am.
I have no choice.
I have no choice.
Kind of like I have to. I'm like, there's all this pain of rejection that I have to face, which I really didn't want to face. But at the same time, I recognize, like, this is who I am. Like it was. Wow.
Well, congratulations.
So
Congratulations. Go ahead, Fabio.
So Valencia, I first of all, let me tell you that I kind of, I think we got a few decades between the two of us, but I recognize exactly what you're talking about. And I'll just tell you this episode. So obviously I was raised in Italy, so I was grown Catholic. And I remember I was 7, and I was going to catechism, to learn for the first communion. And I went to the priest and I asked them, so tell me why I need to believe in dogma, in Christian dogma. And there was a huge kind of problem. So I recognize a lot your attitude towards kind of challenging authority. I think it's a healthy. It's healthy, challenging authority. At the same time, it can be also destructive. At least that's my experience, and let you get carried away with the iconoclastic behavior and not really kind of build. Which is, again, at least from my experience, that was something that was going in the way of my intuition. So my relentless challenging, established thought was actually such a consuming part of my being that was essentially an obstacle to me opening up to my true intuition and kind of see what, see truth, what truth is. And truth can be sometimes in an institutionalized organization or person, or can be from the most irreverent extreme.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah.
To me, one problem that we face in this society that our ancestors, and even those of us that are older even than me, didn't face, is the continuous interface with technology. So, because to me, intuition, the synchronicity you're talking about, kind of finding a video or kind of coming across a piece of information, might be through intuition or might through synchronicity, might be through synchronicities when they happen in a natural state. So you're walking in the forest, all of a sudden you see a rock that reminds you, or you raise your eyes and you see a cloud that reminds you of something, and that ignites a cascade of thoughts that causes like a catharsis, right? But when I go on the internet and I come across a video or I come across a web page, I need to be very conscious that that is not a random and casual event. It's an event that is guided and organized by algorithms written by people that are targeting my preferences. So, everything that you see in Google or everything that you see in YouTube is engineered to appeal to you somehow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I guess you're describing something that was talked about in The Social Dilemma. Yeah. Everybody has been telling me about this movie, and I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it.
I don't know. Okay, great. I don't know.
It's really good. It's by the people who created the systems are trying to tell you how dangerous the systems are.
Right. And, but it's obvious because we are placed, the system is placing us in a resonance chamber where we have this validation, constant validation without challenge, right? There's very little challenging us, and there's a lot of validating us. And then there is the other aspect of social media, where people express as themselves in social media in a way that would not ever express themselves in real life. And you lose completely, 85%.
The human, the
85% of communication, because, as you know, communication is only about, when it's written, is only about 20% written. You only communicate about 20% of capacity. When it's verbal, it's only about 30%. And then you have, when you have like in-person conversation, there is body language. And that's why, for instance, we prefer doing Zoom videos to phone calls, right? Because you have a better perception of the person, right? You have a more emotional connection to the person.
A fuller picture.
Right. So, I think that the compound, social engineering that we all victims of, and the resonance chambers that are created with that really are not enabling further enlightenment or intuition or development of qualities, but actually they end up shutting us down and triggering false patterns that are born out, again, to go back to in the left brain, but they give us the illusion of being born out of the right brain, because they look like, they sound like, that wow moment. That's why, right? And what it is actually filling gaps that true intuition doesn't need to be filled, right? When you have a true intuitive moment, there is no need for explanation. There is no need to say, oh, this is because of this and this is because of that, right? It just is, and it's completely detached from anything. right?
Yeah, so I have two I don't know if I consider it conflicting, but I definitely perceive a lot of social engineering and indoctrination to make us more left-brained than right-brained. And I've seen some brilliant videos and articles about this very subject, about the way the education system is laid out. And I happen to experience education here in Jakarta when I was younger, and then Singapore after I was 15 because of a scholarship. So I experienced two very different systems of education. One that's very much just memorization and regurgitation, and the other one that actually involves more critical thinking and analysis. And so and just kind of talking to people in general. So I observed that. I observed the social engineering, but I have not actually perceived these algorithms that you describe as some sort of like the master of my fate. Like, yeah, I sometimes observe like, oh, I was just talking about this. Why do I see an ad about this now? You know, like as if they could just hear what I was saying. And some people might react to that with like, oh my God, I'm being spied on. Like they know everything about me. Whereas I'm kind of like, I actually didn't mind it. Like, I'm kind of like, it has shown me things that maybe I wouldn't have found if I went and searched for it myself. So in a way, I felt like I was making use of the system rather than feeling taken advantage of by the system. If
But
that
you-
makes sense.
Right.
Right.
No, I mean, that makes sense, but that isn't intuition. That is not a synchronicity. That is not something that adds to your cognitive and right brain patterning. It's more about, more confirmation bias to a certain extent. It's adding things to what we already believe, right? So if I go on YouTube, I will get like a crazy mix of things. YouTube doesn't know what to think of me because I use it very randomly. So I get like Joe Rogan, and then I get Pope Francis, and then I get science fiction movies. So it's like all mixed up into like a crazy thing. And then all of a sudden there is kind of a Fox News alert, and I don't know where that's coming from. But it is very much. But if for a period, if I start reading or studying or being interested in a certain subject, I can see that the pattern becomes very much funneled and focused in that perspective. All I'm saying is not, I'm not judging or criticizing you using YouTube or Google or whatever, because we all do. I just kind of expressing the pitfall of the false illusion that this is giving you information that you are meant to receive. It's giving you information that somebody is decided that you should receive because that resonates with your pattern.
Right. What do you think about that, Valencia?
I don't perceive it that way because everything in the universe, whether it's technology or the trees or the clouds, they are all part of our reality. And
I don't agree.
This might not be just how I perceive life, but I perceive the universe as always being in communication with us. I perceive the universe as being in communication with me, and they communicate in ways that I understand.
So you're saying even if there are algorithms that are working on giving you that video right now, you're saying that but the universe is in supercharge. There's a greater power orchestrating everything ultimately. So I'm okay with those smaller manipulations. They're part of a greater plan.
It's still an aspect of the experience in a way, because I could be I could have decided by some random reason to just be sleeping or sitting on the porch instead of opening my phone or something for that moment. Or
but you're not unaware. As long as you're not unaware of these other systems that are going on, I think that's what's important, because you could make meaning, right? You could choose to make meaning for certain things that are clearly curated intentionally by other people,
By an algorithm, not by other people.
By an algorithm, or but the people who wrote that algorithm to some degree. Not specifically people choosing
they didn't
you in person.
Yeah, exactly.
No. It's just an algorithm, right? An algorithm that is very tooled toward echo chamber-ish behavior, or you can interpret that as the universe telling you what to see next, or you could interpret that as that algorithm and the universe is still in charge, right?
Well, yes,
different,
yes
but there's
and no.
different meaning, right? There's different meaning.
To me, it's like the difference, right? That you go into a bookshop, and there are kind of hundreds and thousands of books, and you browse, and all of a sudden you come across a book that you would never read. You pick up a book randomly, right? Or you go on the Amazon store, right? And you're looking for a book, and you think that you're browsing, right, with the same freedom that you are in a bookstore shop, but you're actually not browsing with the same freedom, because all of the order of the books or the items that are proposed to you, they are engineered in a way that you're more likely to pick it up. So this is not about consciousness. This is about marketing. That is the difference.
Yeah, I recognize that. Yeah, but I think what we eventually find and what we are eventually drawn to, it's not completely mastered by these algorithms, because I still find information that that are otherwise difficult to find, but it still comes to me. So I don't know. I don't respond to it with fear.
The reality is that maybe that's where we disagree, but the reality is that it is, because the algorithm is so sophisticated, and it's been evolving over such a long period of time that it allows you for minimal freedom of choice. That is how it is built. I was part. Hold on a second, Andrew.
Okay.
I was part of a consortium when I was living in the UK, and part of this group was also Google. So we were like, it was an innovation consortium between different industries, and we went to Google's headquarters, and we were asking questions. And they said, everything we do is public. We have no intellectual property on anything. We leave everything out. And then we ask, so what is the only thing that you protect? And they said, the only thing that we protect is our code, because our code is what allows us to market and make money out of people's choices. So it is exactly, that's what I'm saying, but it is the illusion of freedom of choice, but it isn't. And again, we all use it, as long as we are aware that what comes to us is not fate, is not a synchronicity, is not a random act of the universe. It's an intentional piece of technology that is designed to give us what we are more likely to accept. Does it make sense?
Well, yes, it makes sense, but I disagree. Because I see Andrew's post a lot on Facebook, and we disagree on almost everything. Let's say a lot of things. So it's not like his posts disappear because I disagree with him. So it's not like it's only showing things that I like.
Well, that's not the programming. They're trying to get us to spar. They're trying to get us to spar on purpose. The more I comment on your posts, the more my posts and your posts show up on our feeds. Right? So
but I also see other people's posts that I disagree with, that I never interact with. That I'm like, I don't even bother interacting because they.
But you don't need to talking about the same subjects.
Let me interject here. I think what we're talking about is two cosmological ideas. One, which I think they're both important. One is very important, that we all understand the ways technology is manipulating things to get into our brains. I think we need to be aware of that, and I think we all are aware to some degree of what's going on there. Valencia, I think, also is speaking from this spiritual angle of I trust the universe has a pattern as well, which is a macro plan, if you will, a macro manipulation, if you will, that is something she trusts in. So it doesn't necessarily erase the manipulation going on at the
it
lower
doesn't.
level.
Yeah.
That's still present, and being aware of that's still important. But she has a greater sense of faith that ultimately there are other manipulations going on at a macro level that she trusts in.
I mean, Andrew and I talk a lot about manipulation of the public. Like, I'm super vocal about these things with regards to the media and everything. But with regards to these algorithms, yes, they are man-made, they are designed. But I also feel like it's not like, there is an element of randomness to it as well. And I trust that whatever is being put to me, if I feel drawn to it. So of course, not everything that pops up on my YouTube feed I feel drawn to. Like, you know, sometimes they just put stuff that I'm like, really, you know. So and there are times when I'm like, okay, I feel like watching something, but I don't know what to watch, and I don't find anything that I find worthy of watching. And then randomly, something appears, and one thing leads to another, and it leads to some incidental discovery that I didn't expect. And I don't think that it is impossible to reach intuitively understood information even from technology. Like that's my position, that you can encounter information that brings certain processes in you as well, from technology.
I'm not debating that. I'm debating that is a fruit of an intuitive process.
Okay.
That's what I'm debating. I'm not saying that it's useless. It's obviously it's useful. You know, it kind of compounds to knowledge somehow, but it's not a random intuitive process that is detached from need or want or or objectives. It's very targeted.
Could there be a level? Could there be a layer within all of that systems that where your intuition is still playing a role in your choosing process?
So my opinion is that so to me there is a, and this is historically been documented, right? So as one of my favorite books is anyway. So it's there is a lot of traditional lore around for instance the loss of magic. How magic disappeared from the world, right? And magic disappears from the world when technology and rationality cannot take precedence. So,
I've heard that magic of yesterday is simply the science of tomorrow.
But that's a different concept, Andrew. I mean, that when I say magic, is like the belief. For instance, Arthur. The legend of Arthur and Merlin, right? It's the traditional transition between the old world and the modern world, where Arthur was the last king of England who actually relied on magic. After Arthur, kind of magic disappeared from England, right? By magic is the belief in
something beyond the physical world,
something beyond the controllable or the rational, right? Something that cannot be measured, something that can be experienced but not known,
proven.
Right. So there is to me that's a metaphor for the loss, how technology and rationality bring us to actually detach from the intuitive process. And to me now we are actually so far down that route that we started to believe, and again, this is not personal to you, Valencia, but we're starting to believe that things that are technologically engineered, so very, very fine left brain processes that are made to appear they're actually right brain, in fact, they're completely engineered and manufactured. So that is because there is a logical thinking behind them and a reason to be, right? So it's not like, again, this is not like you going out and watching the sky and seeing a cloud that forms randomly, right? It's you going outside, watching the sky and looking at kind of chemtrails and interpreting those in a different way that might be scientific, that might be rational, or might be magical, right? It's a different pattern that we are experiencing. Does it make sense? So the more we go down the intuition, the route of natural, the more we detach ourselves from the natural,
you're
the more.
You're saying that basically marketers and such are preying on common human pattern recognition and things that would appear to be intuition in order to get us to essentially think we're having an intuitive moment.
Yes, that is to me the fallacy of the New Age system, that it's an engineer marketing system to a belief system that appeals to a modern technology age situation. That it's the same difference of going to the Amazon and doing and going for a shamanic journey in the Amazons, right? Or doing it in an apartment in LA. So you might be taking the same substances, you might kind of be listening to the same music, but the experience is completely different because is the motivation and the goal is fundamentally different. And remember that those marketeers that we're talking about, they studied Jung as much as you have. They know all the theories about the ego, the superego, the global consciousness, and they are working to replicate those concepts in a manufactured way. Right? That is my opinion. So that's why I'm saying that in today's world, and that's where I get cautious, it's very hard to recognize intuition from something that is being fed to us to be looking like intuition.
For me, I consider everything we have as a tool, and you can use tools for good or for bad, however you want to define what's good and bad. And I believe, in my opinion, the universe operates through whatever tools we have. So if it so happens that I'm a sick person in the hospital with no way to go to the outside world, and my only reality is through my screen, that's how the world will communicate to me. And as much as I acknowledge the psychological manipulation, and I've read about this with regards to advertising, how, if I'm not wrong, the nephew of Sigmund Freud was the one who came up with the psychology of modern advertising, which essentially made use of, taking advantage of the humans' like desire for more, and this concept of scarcity, that you're not enough, therefore you need to buy this in order to become enough, but it's never enough because you always need to buy more. So I'm fully aware of all of that, but I don't feel like I am a victim of it. Let's put it this way. Maybe that's the best way that I can put it. I've never felt like I'm a victim of these technologies. I'm kind of like, okay, they are like predicting that I like these things. That actually doesn't make me feel victimized by it. I'm not against other people, not in a way that harms other people. In the same way that, as my friend, my brother actually put it, he happens to work in Facebook marketing. I mean, he doesn't work for Facebook, but he works in digital marketing. So he says, like, you can use these same tools that are taking information about what you like and what you don't like, and use it to sell something that helps people, that legitimately helps people. So you can use that information for nefarious purposes, and you can also use that information for great purposes. What if that same algorithm pops up a course that actually helps people overcome suicidal thoughts, and you happen to have suicidal thoughts?
Sure.
Because I don't believe in this sense of doom around this technology manipulating our experience, and I don't think that it is so removed from the natural life, even though I am completely in agreement with you about the movement away from magic when you become overly rationalized and more scientific. I've seen a lot of materials on the fall of Atlantis, on how that was the path, in a way, that it was like science trumps over everything, and we subjugate intuition and emotion and heart knowing. So I'm completely in agreement with you on that, but I don't feel victimized by these technologies.
No, I don't think it's a question of being victimized. I think it's a question of awareness, right? And kind of using the tools for what they are, right? So I buy a car because it takes me from A to B. I don't buy a car because it makes me feel better about myself, right? So that's like the difference. Like, even if the car is sold to me as a, you know, as a way to actually experience life in a different way that I can't experience if I have a crappy car, right? I need like
be smart about it, basically.
Yeah, be mindful of how you're
be mindful of what the
and not to be too arrogant, to think that we're above it either, that we're like, oh, well, I'm so smart, I'm not manipulated by these things that manipulate every human being categorically because of the subconscious motivations that are universal. Like, yeah, I got to be conscious that, you know, these influences are going to happen to me. I may have to compensate for them. I like to think about intuition as a way a tool that brings in an incredible, you know, I often think of it as like a macro processor, where I'm basically, it's like the microprocessor of the mind goes offline. And then Sherlock Holmes talks about, in the Sherlock Holmes stories, he talks about having a three-pipe problem where he just needs to stop thinking for a little while and just let his mind sort of rest. And in that resting process, all these, you know, myriad of thousands of different ideas and data points sort of begin to find their way into a pattern. And then he's like, I know the answer. It just sort of settles in his mind, and then ba-boom. And he still, of course, goes and investigates to verify the data, to make sure he's got the evidence to support that theory. But I feel like that's the great power of intuition, is that we can do so much more than we even recognize, because we have this macro processor. And the microprocessor, left brain, wants to be in control all the time. It just doesn't have the capacity. It's a less efficient instrument for puzzling all the pieces together. It's useful at times, particularly when you're puzzling two pieces together. Like, well, does this piece actually fit with this piece? That's microprocessor activity, right? That's not the macro. But to get the whole, to get a vision for the whole puzzle, that's where I feel like intuition really sort of sails in. And I get the best intuitions when I'm on a run, or I've just gotten back from a run, I'm in the shower. Most people get intuitions when they're on the toilet, you know, like the places where you're just not distracted and you're not on task.
So I have this funny joke. There is a word in German called Treppenwitz, which means staircase joke. The idea is that, you know, you were walking home and talking to your friend, and there was this, and then you were already going upstairs to your house, and suddenly you thought of the perfect joke that you could have said back with your friend, but it only came to you when you're already not in that situation anymore, when you're not thinking about it, when you're on the stairs. The staircase joke. Yeah, it's German. It has a lot of very funny words.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
But I think, so I think based on what you said, running is like a form of meditation for you. That, you know, I guess when I do improvisational dance, I kind of, the best way I can put it is I perform best when my mind is blank. When I'm not thinking, when I'm just focusing on, let's say, the music. And that one-mindedness, that lack of thinking, brings in a much more powerful transmission or performance, because it's kind of like channeling, but you're like channeling the music. So there are a lot of channelers, like people that supposedly channel, I don't know, like dead people or non-human beings, that will tell you that a lot of us are actually channelers. We just don't realize it. It's just that we channel, we don't have to be channeling an alien in order to be a channeler. We're already in a channeling state when we are doing these activities. Like maybe in your case, it's running, and for me, it's dancing or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you think channeling is the same thing as intuition?
I wouldn't call it intuition. I think channeling is a bit more intentional, at least from my understanding. You can maybe purposely put yourself in a channeling state in order to receive certain information. But I think channeling state may be very similar to a flow state, which tends to also facilitate easier reception of intuitive information because you are more open to it.
Right.
Because what often people describe is the intuition cannot come if your mind is too loud. So it's when you are not thinking so loud that it comes to you because it's softer. The quality of it is softer. Whereas instinct, it's like the fear-based voice is loud. It's like, get out of here now or you're gonna die. Like, like this person is threatening your security.
Right.
Like you need to
survival. It's survival instinct.
Yeah.
Protection.
The survival
defense,
voice is
defensive
loud.
mechanism.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked how
Yeah.
you described the bird migrations and their sense of getting into sync with each other. The idea that human beings don't have that, I think, is foolish. We clearly do, and I understand it from some of the books I've read. Jonathan Haidt describes us as 90% chimp, 10% bee, and that human beings have this extra gear, if you will, to get in sync.
Did you say bee?
Bee, like a bee, and it would beehive.
Like a bee? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because the bees all work in synchronicity and in tandem with each other to build the hive together. They're very group oriented. We're not nearly that group oriented. We're a little more individualistic, but we have these ways of going into it. And Haidt describes the drumming that happens at the beginning of war, when soldiers back in the day were doing marches, they were marching in sync to the drum beat. And that did something special to the brain to get people basically in exact synchronicity with each other. And it sort of turns off other individual thoughts and feelings and gets us to feel more like one unit. And then soldiers fight much better when they're in that state. And you can see it so beautifully resembled in like Roman formations where they form a human tank of these grids of soldiers so that they can fight for like 30 seconds and one person rotates out and the other person immediately takes their place with a huge body shield and they just keep slashing through their enemy. But it's like the rhythm is a huge part of setting the brain up for this. And there's a lot of social science experiments that show this human ability to get into synchronicity with each other. And you might experience it too, just with your friends or someone you're talking to a lot. You might have the same dreams that night. You might, you might finish their sentences. Like there's so many ways that I think that synchronicity pattern is something that we can really tap into. Yeah.
Well, we do have it. Hold on. Yeah,
this is just a very short comment. This is a very short comment. Among women, this tends to happen that you get your period at the same time.
Right, right. And
I don't understand how that happens.
We wonder. I've heard that so many times too. It's like you wonder: is there a biological survival reason for that, or is it just? But it happens. It happens.
Yeah, I don't know.
So there is a big experiment that So the same people that observe this quantum organ that then has been kind of described and identified, it's basically located in the lower eye of birds, and it's literally a quantum organ, right? So it's almost like a gland that produces certain pheromones at a certain point that guide direction. So these guys then started taking videos of the crowds in the stations in London. And I can't remember if it was Paddington Station or Liverpool Station. there is this video that you can look for it on the internet, where people are randomly moving around each other, and you can see that it's incredible how in those crowds of people moving in all different directions, nobody's clashing with each other. And people are, looking at their phone, reading the newspaper, eating breakfast, drinking coffee, talking to their friends, and they still navigate this wave, right? This ocean of people without clashing, in a very similar way as the birds fly within the flock, staying contained in the same globe, but not really straying too much.
And you can't
so we do have.
You can't be in your microprocessor and do that at the same time, can you?
Right. It is, again, this is kind of the bridging between the non-physical and the physical, right? So we are biological beings, as I said at the beginning. So all our translation mechanisms are biological. There is no division between the brain and consciousness, and there is no division between different organs and the effect that consciousness has on biological functions as a whole. Like when friends get together, with female friends get together, they start developing, and they are very aligned and they're very synchronized. They start developing periods at the same time, and that happens all the time. Or people that start finishing each other's sentences, right, when they're very close. So to me, that is not intuition.
That's synchronicity.
That is a synchronicity. That is a completely different biological mechanism that has nothing to do with intuition. To me, intuition is literally something out of the blue.
Illogical.
Something that seems illogical, that seems irrational. And that if you try to explain it, you actually have a really hard time to rationalize it, because it's not really that rational in the first place. Channeling, this concept of channeling, again, is not an intuitive piece in my mind. Intuition,
I don't think.
It's more of a translational piece. And, it could be. So I don't know if you ever heard of Darren Brown.
No.
So Darren Brown is this very interesting entertainer. It's again British. I would kind of highly recommend watching some programs. And he's an entertainer. He's a magician, right? It's an illusionist. He creates these big illusions. So he uses a lot of nonverbal signaling to interpret what appears to be a psychic revelation. So he would be channeling, right, essentially, or there would be like psychic manifestations that he kind of shows in his programs, in his shows, which are actually just the result of a very, very fine and very skilled ability to read people and to read kind of nonverbal signs. So channeling to me has more to do with that innate ability to perceive very fine messages that we exchange, and it could be chemical, it could be visual, it could be auditory. It's sense-based or can be not sense-based, but it's the difference between intuition and all of these processes that we are talking about. Just to cut this long story short, I know I'm kind of rambling a bit, is that all of those are very deductive processes. So it's like gathering information from a starting point, and then you add on pieces that deductively make sense together.
Right.
Intuition is a fully inductive process. So it's the innovation. It's Nikola Tesla thinking that electromagnetic energy could be converted into power. It's
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Marie Curie relating.
So you're saying it's not really pattern recognition at all, is what you're saying.
It's not
Yeah,
pattern
no,
recognition.
yeah, that I can agree.
It's
Yes.
completely it's pattern discovery. It's a discovery of the pattern, right?
Yeah, I think that is I agree with that, because with the same friend that I was talking about that wanted to program intuition, I was literally just like, the whole point of intuition is that it's unexpected. So how can you program something that you cannot even expect? As I explained to him, the only thing you can train is how you can learn to distinguish the flavor of intuition, like what you described earlier in this conversation. Like, is this instinct, is this just a feeling, or is this intuition? Because it can be easy to mistake between the different kinds of subtle feelings, and sometimes maybe you think this is intuition, but it's actually not, and you're just wishing that it is intuition.
Or it is my trauma talking, right? It's because PTSD. Again, or it could be my trauma talking, because PTSD, or at least kind of any kind of post-traumatic event, and we all have like a level of trauma in our lives, right? Conditions a false intuitive process, and that's very well described in psychology and in neurology, where there is like a jump which justifies the leap, right? And we call it intuition, but it's not intuition at all. It's like justification, which is different. So, so there are several mechanisms. I just, I think that there are ways to develop intuition, at least the way I've experienced it. I actually was taught to learn how to become more intuitive. And it just became like that system of opening up, that kind of specific telephone line when I need to, but also to be able to recognize that voice versus all the other voices that kind of speak at the same time from our own environment. Might be YouTube, or the Google algorithm, or
so I've got these different. I'm gonna just want to list off the different things that we've been talking about that are basically non-microprocessor activities. We've got synchronicity, which is closely linked to flow state, channeling, PTSD, and intuition. And so these and they all seem to be non-thinking processes, right? And I should also mention the the healing of trauma, or the healing of the sort of the healing process can sometimes also feel like a non-logical sort of shift of consciousness, shift of energy, right?
The well-described catharsis of most of the Catholic saints, or a lot of the mystical figures in history, right?
Right. So that's an interesting, a lot of things to sift through when we're determining what's good. Now, let me quickly describe a story. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink, and in which he talks about intuitive processes, and he talks about how basically he basically argues that the people who are really expert in something, their intuitions are good. They're very accurate. And the people who are novices in certain things, they think their intuition is good, but it generally isn't. That they're often not getting an accurate read on things. And he uses this great example at the beginning of this sculpture that was discovered sunken in a harbor. And they dredged and pulled it out of there. And they're like, oh my God, it looks like it's from Greek antiquity. It must be 2,500 years old. And one of these archaeologists took one look at it and he's just like, I don't get it. It doesn't look right. And he couldn't tell them why it didn't look right. He couldn't, his microprocessor couldn't say why. For months, the other analysts, the young analysts, like were taking scrapings of it. And it's like, looks like it's 2,500 years old. And they just kept confirming and confirming until finally they did a deeper drilling in, and to get like a little mini core sample. And then they found something that was a dead giveaway that it had been doctored and it was probably less than 20 years old. And then they went back to the initial archaeologists who had so much experience, so many thousands of hours of experience with ancient antiquity sculptures. And they were able to go, yeah, you know what, the patina was slightly off. There were like all these things that were so subtle, they couldn't consciously recognize why it didn't feel right to them, but it just didn't feel right. And so it's like they something about it, they just knew. And it was only the people who were the experts in the world, only the people who had thousands and thousands of hours of experience saw it. And so what I want to just sort of bring this as an example to like how do we trust our intuitions about things in which we are not experts versus things that we have a lot of experience?
I don't think that's intuition, Andre.
Same. I was just gonna say.
Okay.
I think that's not so much intuition. That's really much the definition of intuition that we were talking about at the beginning, of kind of misplacing intuition with experience.
So that's the macro. So you're saying that's what we call the macro processing that is essentially conscious. I mean, it may be subconscious, but it's essentially a rational process. It's not irrational.
Yeah. I mean, you know how to ride a bike. You don't think about everything that you do when you ride a bike, but you know how to ride a bike, right? And when you've been riding a bike for 20 years, you just jump on the bike and you know how to ride it and underneath the rain. But and you know when the bike is right and when the bike is wrong. But that is very much experience that becomes so integrated into your consciousness that you don't need the processing anymore. Right.
My friend who's a hypnotherapist. I'm sorry for the noise, by the way. This happens especially more on Fridays, and it's Friday where I am. But yeah, my hypnotherapist friend made this workshop about understanding the mind, and he was describing these levels of competence where you move from unconscious incompetence, where you didn't even know you're not good at something because you didn't even know that you need to be competent at it, and then as you start doing it, you become conscious incompetent, and then from more practice you become conscious and competent, and then you move into unconscious competence, which is I guess what you described as experience, where it is a form of pattern recognition. And I think what Fabio said,
it's expertise, but it's unconscious expertise at a certain point.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, properly for so long.
It's basically become, it's become like fully integrating to your biology. Right. So that you actually feel it not as an explanation, you feel it as a gut feeling, right? So I get that too, in the sense that after 20 years of looking at clinical data, kind of stacks of patient records, I look at something and I immediately start recognizing patterns, right? So I don't think that's fully intuition. So again, in my experience, I can see the difference, right, at work, between what is pattern recognition and what is intuition. So intuition, to give you a very kind of, I can only give broad example because obviously, we are all kind of about confidentiality in this industry. Intuition could be, so pattern recognition could be, this group of patients seem to have something that other patients don't have, right? And that's something that I can see because there's a subtle but perceivable difference in my mind. The intuition step is when I look at something and I say, I think that we are looking at a completely different disease, or I think this is, this is not the same thing. It's like what we were talking about when we started talking about COVID, right? And I don't want to go into the discussion of COVID.
Not into detail, but yeah, how did you use your intuition
right.
when it came
that
to the COVID?
When it first came through, when there was no information and no detail about that, I had this kind of a really clear sense that we weren't discussing or talking about a respiratory disease. There was something that was different and less straightforward.
So when the experts were basically claiming they thought it was a respiratory disease, and most doctors were treating it that way, you doubted it. You were like, that's something that's not right about this.
And there was like when at the very early days when there was like, just the data coming out of China. So there was very little, even before Italy started getting shut down. And then when I started, actually looking at the Italian experience, and I started looking at other people and what was coming out of the literature, then I actually was like, oh, that's why I was thinking in that way. Right? That's why I had, so it was completely, that sense was completely inexplainable.
Yeah. And you didn't ask for it. You didn't summon your intuition it just came to you. It just hit you because it was something that needed to be said, right?
Right.
So Valencia, how do you experience intuition in what you do? And I would assume you don't just summon it.
Yeah, I definitely don't summon it. And in fact, I don't know necessarily if I use intuition a lot in the sense of my professional life, in dance specifically. But I use it to, like in the project that I've been doing online, we make call outs and people apply for it. And a lot of times I actually judge them just based on how their words make my energy feel. It's a very intuitive sense. And it's the same way when I travel and I couch surf and I just kind of like get a vibe of people just from what they write. And this usually turns out to be pretty accurate. Like if they give me a certain feeling from reading what they write, the same feeling usually happens when I meet them. And with the people in the project, it's an art project. So typically you look for like people who do great art or something. In my case, I brought in a lot of people whose art didn't really impress me so much, but they have surprised me a lot later on in very good ways. And I've kind of chosen them just from a certain sense of like, I resonate with their energy. I feel like they will be a good fit. So they come in, even if they have no portfolio that I can perceive, just based on what they write. And so, yeah, so I don't know if that...
Do you think that might be more of a macro processing kind of function?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. It's not so much a thinking, but a feeling way of doing things. And it's not necessarily like, like I didn't summon it. It's just a sensing. And aside from that, I guess when I'm, I really don't think I would call it intuition. Again, it's more of the flow state. When I dance, especially when it's improvised, the moment I start thinking, I'm out of it. So the challenge is to stay unthinking. And sometimes intuitive stuff comes very
comes while you're
unexpected.
Right, while you're
in that sense. Yeah, like if I drop something that I'm not supposed to drop, in a performance, I dropped a shawl and I wasn't planning to drop it. And I think the audience felt that. And it actually made that whole experience much more riveting because they were like, what's she gonna do about this shawl that just dropped, And then it was kind of like, and then I played with it. And I think if I had purposely dropped the shawl, it wouldn't have had the same effect. The reason why that was powerful is because it was not intentional. Not that the dropping of it was an intuitive thing, but that what happened after was. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I relate intuition much more with my personal life, I think, as what I described earlier.
Yeah,
Something just
to me
comes
that
to you,
seems,
it's like a discovery. Go ahead, Fabio.
yeah,
Yeah.
to me that sounds, quite honestly, to me that sounds a little strange, because the way you describe things, I actually see the opposite in a way, in the sense that it seems to me that um, when you do art or, specifically dance, and it's not planned, and there is no rehearsal, or kind of you might have a starting point, but you don't really know where you're going, right? To me, that sounds um, very intuitive as a process, um, because it's a direct connection between, the superconscious, or the kind of collective conscious, and your body. So there is no interface with the logical thinking, right? And that's maybe why that resonates so much with the public in a very instinctual way, because again, it's that connection to something that is not left brain.
Right.
Whereas it seems to me that um, when you talk about um, your personal relationship, although it seems intuitive in the way you describe it, I wonder how much of that non-verbal communication bias and kind of subtle messaging and channeling there is going on, which is actually an analytical approach, right? Which is actually a deductive approach, which you say it seems like an intuition, but it's actually the fruit of experience and nonverbal communication and a number of different biases, conscious and unconscious, that come into play. Does it make sense? So to me, it almost sounds like the
Yeah.
opposite when you
So,
describe it.
with regards to my personal life, the analysis comes after the intuitive knowledge arrives. So the knowledge, the sense of knowing, that is the intuitive aspect. But how I interpret it is the analysis, if that makes sense. The same way that when I'm dancing and I'm having these experiences, I'm completely in the flow, and afterwards I might analyze that flow experience.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In my experience, I have these sort of riveting conversations with people where it gets into a flow state, and we keep talking, and they're maybe telling me about something that books that they've read, like many books that they've read, and I'm not even in the same world of knowledge base that they're in on that topic, and I'll just be listening and listening, and all of a sudden it's like the idea just comes straight to me, like an entire world of reality suddenly is right in my mind, and then I just speak back to them what I'm seeing, and sometimes it blows them away because it's almost more synthesized than they had done after reading the books. And I'm like, I don't know, I have no idea how I did that. It just came, And I had one experience within a conversation that was much more vivid, with he was a facilitator for racism in particular, and I was talking to this other person, and he suddenly interrupted, and he just said, "Andrew, just stop thinking, stop rationalizing, like just look. That's trauma right there. You're seeing trauma." And when he said that, not only did I get what he was saying, but I just downloaded like his entire, I felt like his entire world perspective, on on the racist state of the world. Now, I'm not sure that that's the true state of the world. I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but I got a really vivid download of his perspective on reality. And I was grateful for it, because that's what I think all conversations are for, is to really absorb as much as you can of someone else's lens. But it was like, he was such a feeling type that I think he was trying to give it to me. He was like leaning into me with his mind, and I just suddenly got it. And I don't know if that's intuition or if that's more what we were talking about with like channeling, or some sort of synchronous quantum moment. But that's
some
what
people call it downloads. I don't know if that would be the same thing, but and I, what I described earlier, that some of you refer to as a prophetic moment, I kind of refer to that as like a download. Like I just got a download, like an epiphany, something, and people like psychics kind of describe it that way sometimes, that they just get some downloads. They don't know where it comes from, but they get these downloads. Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen this TED talk by a woman who's a brain surgeon that got a stroke. It was quite viral.
Oh, yes.
Did you see that?
I think I
Yeah,
know
and
exactly
I
who
think,
you're talking about.
yeah, I really like the way she described the left and the right brain, because I think she put it so well. And earlier when you were talking about how the left brain's good at these things and the right brain's good at these other things, that TED talk came to mind, because I kind of felt like, and this goes back to what Fabio said about the brain being a translator. I kind of feel like the left and the right brain are like antennas to different frequencies or different ways of looking at things. And I kind of feel like, I believe that we are multidimensional, and we know that the visible light is only this small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, that this is the small thing that we can perceive in this three-dimensional world. So I feel like the left brain is the antenna for that world. The left brain is attuned to the things that are like linear and one thing after the other, and like organization and language and things like that, whereas the right brain is attuned to the things that are not so visible, and it's more big picture, and it's more like left is like separation, the right is about like oneness and no separation. So they're very polarized, but I think they serve very distinct purposes. And I think in a lot of the things I've read that resonate with me is that we are beings that know what it's like to be in oneness, but we want to have the experience of separation. So this is an experiment in separation, because in a way, when it was all oneness, it was perfect and it was boring. So we're like, oh, let's try how it feels like to have all this separation. And the ego, the left brain, is necessary for us to have that experience. And it's like, without it, then it's like we are playing a game where we already know all the cheats for. Then it's not exciting anymore. So the left brain serves that purpose. So I think all this like demonizing of the ego, I think the ego is very important. It serves a very important purpose, and I think we need to make friends with it instead of demonizing it.
Yeah, I think that's a very new age concept. I think that's I understand where you're coming from.
Is there a problem with that, Fabio?
Well, to me, it's again, it's a different experience, I guess, right? So I come, and that's all where you come from. I come from a Christian Catholic tradition, and there is this idea of mysticism, right? The abandonment and letting yourself go to the will of God, right? That God basically is going to guide you, whether you want it or not. You're still going to go in the same direction, and therefore the ego just gets in the way of getting there more quickly. So that to me, it's the kind of mystical principle, if you want to call it like that. But it's actually also my personal experience. I always been very ego-minded in the sense that very much into that law of attraction mindset that if I desire it, I can get it. If I put enough work into this, I can go where I need to go. If I try hard enough, this is gonna work. And then around my late 40s, early 50s, I discovered that was a big lie. At least for me, it didn't work at all. And the moment I actually let go and abandoned expectations and desire to a certain extent. That's when actually I started experiencing true abundance, both in a metaphorical, but also in a very, very practical way. So it's very interesting to me that I actually don't perceive the ego as being helpful. I perceive it as being a remnant of a mindset that we've been building over the last 2,500 years, 3,000 years, out of fear and necessity. And this is what it drives us to individualism and to protectivism, and to builds us, judgment of others, and kind of drives us to think about ourselves as better than another person, or as being more knowledgeable, or having the absolute truth when the other person doesn't. So to me, that is a very new way, and that, to me, that's why I think that the New Age philosophy is so damaging, because it creates a false illusion, a very convenient model where you are justifying hierarchy, judgment, but you kind of coat it with this veneer of spiritualism or spirituality and false hypocritical niceness. And
But befriending the ego is not justifying hierarchy. I don't know if that's what you understood it as, befriending the ego.
now
I didn't mean
befriending the ego. I mean, obviously, we are individuals. We're all kind of people, right? And every individual is a slightly different from the other, right? What I'm observing is we are valuing the ego, but only to the extent that it is homogeneous to a knowledge stream of thought. So you can only be an individual as long as you subscribe to a level of collective principles, right? So you are in a...
This sounds really fascinating, but I'm not sure we can get into it. This seems like a whole nother topic, and I'm not
That's
sure
another
if
topic,
we have
yeah.
time to get into
But it relates to, without going into detail, in my opinion, it relates to the discussion about intuition, because one of the characteristics of the ego is that it has a goal, it has an objective, it has a plan to a certain extent. Conscious or unconscious, there is something that you want to achieve through your actions, right? And that is where it goes in the way of the intuition, because intuition might tell you that the direction that you go in is actually not the right one.
Right. And that's
But
what
you
Valencia
still...
said. And that's what Valencia said at the beginning of this conversation, which I love, which is that often these intuition thoughts come to her, and she doesn't want to hear them. They're
Right.
the thought you don't want to hear. You're like, I've been afraid that might be true. I don't want to know. And it's like,
right.
she keeps bumping against you. And I just love that, because it's like you're tapping into some, and I don't want to call it truth, simply because I want to be careful not to let the rational mind co-opt whatever it is, but it's some kind of true feeling or experience. Something about it is true, is natural, unadulterated by the warpings of the mind. And that's what's so valuable about it, because it can break us out of our purview.
Right.
Yeah, I think what Fabio talked about with regards to the ego having a purpose, I just basically kind of separate the psyche into the egoic mind and the conscious mind. I don't know if you'll call that again New Age philosophy, but I call one of them to operate based on attachment and the other one based on love, which is non-attached to the outcome. So the ego wants a certain outcome. It does some things in order to get something, whereas the conscious self, I consider it to do something because it loves doing it, because doing it gives joy. you know,
But
and
that's
and and
that is
yeah.
still a goal. That is still
There's
a
still an
biological
agenda.
loop.
There's still an
Yes,
agenda
there's
attached
still
to
an
it.
agenda.
To me that's different because you know, like it's kind of like
When you define love,
your
Valencia,
the joy is the byproduct of the action. And actually, in a way, that if you do it purposely just to get the joy, then it's already in the wrong direction. Because the doing aspect of it, then the byproduct of it gives you joy, even if actually you are resistant to doing it, you know. In the sense that I feel we are happiest when we are creating more than we are consuming. And so I feel most energized when I'm creating a lot, but it's also tiring. And there are times when I'm creating a lot and I'm like, man, I wish I can just sit down and have 2 hours to just like tune out and just watch something,
Right.
instead of creating, you know. But creating gives me a lot of joy. So it's kind of like, you know, it's the thing that you do when you enjoy doing it and you don't know where it's gonna take you. But if you follow the joy, then it kind of takes you to where you need to be in the end. And you kind of, you're letting the process guide you instead of the destination.
I can see where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. I think that
Yes. So
I'm looking
yeah.
at things in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
It's not that I disagree with you. I'm just kind of look at it from a different perspective.
my word is truth. I usually use truth as my word instead of joy. Like, so when I'm after the truth, that's sort of what my agenda, if you will, is like I'm leaning, and that means for me total detachment. That means total detachment from
Yeah.
any desires, any agendas, even if the agenda is just keeping the mindset I currently have. It's like, nope, everything's off the table. And to me, that is a focusing or a guiding principle that helps. It helps, at the very least. It helps. I'm not saying it completely disengages all of this, which is always happening, but it helps to disengage to some degree and allow me to be more open to what may be more real than I'm currently willing to accept.
So
Yeah.
Andrew,
And yes,
sorry, go
keep
for
going.
it. No, I was like,
I
no,
think
you keep going. You keep going.
I think we should. I think we should all just say our closing words. I think we've really done a great exploration here, and I think we should wrap it up. So closing comments, closing thoughts.
Well, yeah, I guess just in following to what I was just saying, that in recognizing your egoic side better, you're able to then master it, not control it, but to just like, okay, I recognize that this is my ego's impulse. I'm not gonna go there. You can still choose to go there if you want, but at least you recognize it. The same way you're talking about being aware of the algorithms behind Google and Facebook and blah, blah, blah. It's just, it's healthy to be aware of these things so that you can, you know, kind of work with it instead of being unconsciously pulled by it.
Yes, I think that's so key, because I feel like, and I've done this too, where I think that I'm disengaging the conscious mind, and that's somehow going to give me intuitive, quote unquote, truth, and all I'm doing is shutting down thinking. So instead, I'm doing the absolute opposite, which is to grab the truth I want to be true and go, aha, I'm done. You see how relaxed I am? That's intuition. That's totally ridiculously wrong. It's the opposite, really.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is to be attentive to that within yourself, and not to sort of like demand other people to prove that what they are feeling is intuition, because this is what often people do. Like, how do you know that what you think is true? And I'm like, it's not my job to prove it to you. Like, how can I prove it to you? It's something that you feel inside. So it's just, you can only police yourself. You know, you can only recognize it within yourself, and you can't prove it in any way. Like, yeah.
Right. And I just like to bring the most mindfulness I can. The more, if I'm as mindful as I can possibly be in this very present moment, and it still is true, well, that's the best I can do. That's the best I can do for now. I'll keep working. I'm not done. But that mindfulness means
It's never done.
I'm not ignoring anything, right? If I'm not ignoring anything, I'm doing pretty well. Fabio?
Yeah, I think first of all, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think it was very stimulating. I'm exhausted. Um, I yeah, I think that what I understand is that intuition is not easily defined. It's literally something that,
Definitely.
yeah, that is known, but not, it's like that knowing without understanding. And that's where it becomes really difficult to integrate it into a conversation. While we were talking, I actually remembered the book I was talking about the transition from magical to religious thinking. And it's called The Mists of Avalon.
Oh, yeah.
It's a beautiful novel. And I find it really, it was like really mesmerizing to me, beautiful.
Yeah.
There is a quote that I have somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I have a quote extracted from that book about literally this transition between magic and religion. And the difference between magic and religion is that magic is intuition, and religion is rationalization
Dogma.
of what is not not explainable. So I think that also intuition is one of those things that tells you that it's okay to change your mind and to reevaluate things that you believe to be true. And I think that's a very important human quality, to actually be unattached to our own beliefs. So I want to leave it like that.
Yeah, I think, as I described with my experiences, I think intuition exists independent of belief. Whether you believe it or not, it kind of tends to manifest anyway. It's like a foreshadowing in a novel,
Yeah. But you see, it might be independent of belief, but intuition is never independent of facts, because intuition always validates itself, not with belief, but with fact. Right?
Yeah. It happens, it manifests. And and I think that how I've always kind of treated this is that we intuitively know the information that is important for us. And there are things that I watch that resonate with me so strongly that somebody else would watch and it's just like nothing, because maybe that information is not important to them. And it doesn't mean it's not right, it's just not important for them. In the same way that I watched The Matrix twice, once in 1999 and the other one just early this year. And I had two very different experiences of watching the exact same movie.
I remember you saying that. I followed that conversation, with Andre when you described that.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about that another time. I think that's another interesting topic.
Yeah.
I think we're going to clash a little bit more on that one.
Yeah.
It's great.
But essentially, maybe that was not so important for me when I was 9, when I watched it the first time. But the second time I watched it, it felt significant. Like I felt like this. And then when COVID hit, I was like, aha. It's like, of course I was made to watch this movie now.
Right. So this is lovely. I really like that we're all in discussion, because I think that we all have these tools. We have more tools than we realize, and that they don't necessarily pick up the same thing as the next person. And so by being in discussion, we're maximizing on our collective tools to perceive reality more clearly. So thank you both for being part of this conversation.
Yeah, and thank you for making it happen.
Pleasure.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. We're no longer